I'm really excited to be here with Dr. Stephen Davey. This is the first time that he's on Shepherds Seminary podcast. And I would also note that it's perfectly applicable to the next series of episodes dealing with pastoral ministry and endurance. And so we're excited to talk with Dr. Davey about this. And so, Dr. Davey, one of the things that we typically try to talk about on this podcast are things that are applicable to both the pastoral ministry as well as the student who's maybe even graduated our very own seminary. And one of the things that I think gets asked a lot by the broader audience is just, who is Stephen Davey? That guy at Shepherds Theological Seminary at the Shepherds Church in Cary, North Carolina. So you want to just give us a little brief background about yourself?
Sure. Well, first of all, I'm Stephen, not doctor. It's an honorary doctorate. I don't have it on any information anymore because I well remember what a guy said when I was in college before I even understood what an honorary doctorate was. But he said in the pulpit, he said, I've been given an honorary doctorate. And you know what an honorary doctorate is like? It's like putting whipped cream on an onion. So there you go. So I'm Stephen.
I appreciate that.
Okay.
I appreciate that.
Well, I grew up as a missionary kid in Norfolk, Virginia, and after a couple of different colleges and seminaries, became a church planter. The Lord opened the door to plant a church, primarily because I couldn't get a job at another church because I needed 3 to 5 years experience. I would go to that seminary job board where they had all this 3 by 5 cards, and they all said, church of 30 people, church of 50 people, 150 people. At the very bottom, it would say 3 to 5 years experience.
Yeah.
And I didn't have that. So we began to pray about where to go to plant a church. And God wasn't writing anything in the sky. We wanted to be a mission-sending church, mission-supporting church. I knew I wanted to be stateside. My wife and I are both East Coast. So we sort of narrowed the country down in fairly pragmatic terms, but didn't know exactly where. And one night, I asked my wife, who is not a prophetess, by the way, we believe that ceased, but I asked her, where would you want to pick a state? Pick a state. And she said, North Carolina. And she was calculating the difference between Georgia and Virginia. And kind of picked middle road, wasn't quite middle, but she sort of picked that, and that just came to her mind. And what was interesting was as she was thinking about it, what came to my mind was North Carolina. We've never lived here, didn't know anybody here, but for some reason, North Carolina came to mind. As a seminary student, a pretty strong placement office. They have your resume as a graduating STM, which meant I had an MDiv from another seminary, the THM year. All the THMers had to put their resume in the hat. I didn't want to do that. We wanted to find a city, not a pulpit. So we were praying for a city. We were praying for a region that God could use us as missionaries. And so I got a call from placement office, where's your resume? And it's one of those last things to do before you graduate. And I said, well, I really didn't want to do it. And that's okay. And the secretary said, well, that's not okay. You got to talk to Dr. Salstrom. So I, trooped up the stairs to meet with Dr. Salstrom, who's been with the Lord now many years. But at any rate, this gray-haired gentleman heard my story that we were praying for a city, not a pulpit. And he said, I'll like that. Don't worry about your resume. And I had bumped into a couple of guys that were planning on planting a church in Raleigh. And one of the guys was in front of me, a seat in front of me in class. And he asked me what I was going to do. And I said, well, I'm thinking of North Carolina. And Raleigh, of course, is on my mind because it's the capital of the state. And so he gave me all this Chamber of Commerce material he had just gotten in the mail that day, the student mailbox, because he was coming to Raleigh to start a church. He ended up becoming a missionary in Eastern Europe. Came back the next week after looking at all that material, getting fairly excited about the growth. This place was exploding. And he said, well, there's another friend of mine who's going to graduate, and he's going to Raleigh to plant a church. And he just got back from weekend survey trip, and he's got 200 pictures, slides,
Wow.
those little square things. And so that night, my wife and I are sitting on the living room floor and in that guy's house watching
Wow.
his review. He ended up going on staff with Gene Getz in Plano, Texas. Well, I was the one that came to Raleigh, and so Marcia and I planted the church 39 years ago. And so most of our marriage, we'd been married 5 years when we came here. So most of our marriage has been church planting here in Cary. Cary, for our audience, is a bedroom community in the middle of a triangle. It's Raleigh, Durham, Chapel Hill. That creates this triangle. And right in the middle is Cary. And then it's all research oriented. So there are more PhDs in this region than anywhere else in the country. You have Duke. I hate to say it, but you have Duke nearby. You've got UNC, you have NC State, all within 25 minutes. So this is just an exploding region. And with the research and development companies moving in here over the last 40 years, they'll let people go in other places in the country, and they'll hire in Cary. So it's been kind of an interesting bubble for us. But that's a quick overview of the last 67 years.
Oh, that's so fantastic. I've heard you tell the story multiple times about how the Lord led you here, and it just always amazes me. It's just so cool to see what God does. And of course, he works in such marvelous ways to do those kinds of things.
Yeah.
And I love just even seeing your personality come out. And obviously, not everyone who's going to watch this or listen to this knows you as well as I have the privilege of knowing you. So I love the little personality things that come out in stories like that. And I hope that's helpful for people. Now, obviously, you mentioned a little tidbit in there that this is going to be the 40th year coming up.
Yeah. Right.
And so, Lord willing, maybe you have had some experience that you could share with us. And I think just out of the gate, I would ask on behalf of everyone who's thinking through this, what kind of unique, temptations, trials did you experience early on in that process? Obviously, it wasn't just smooth sailing.
Yeah.
So that's going to be one of the big themes in the next few episodes is some of the trials in ministry kind of make people want to stop. And so what kind of things did you experience in the early parts of ministry?
Well, if we're going to talk about the difficult things, it's hard to whittle it down. But I would say one of the surprising things to me was people arriving at a church, and we had 28 people that first Sunday. And within 6 months, we had what I would call a power struggle. And it surprised me that people had an agenda where they wanted to control the church. And I ended up guarding the gate for the assembly very early on. And to this day, that's still my primary role. We were talking a little bit before the camera started rolling about the greenhouse class, the new members class. I encourage pastors not to guard the back door. That's just frustration. People don't belong to us. They're not ours. They're not our people. They're God's. So rather than guard that back door and try to make everybody answer the question, why are you leaving?
Right.
Guard the front door. And so our class for new members is now 13 weeks, and I teach it on Sunday nights. I love it. I get to know everybody by name, and but I'm also guarding it from wrong doctrine. We are a church, as you know. Sign gifts would be a big issue, speaking in tongues. So we want to take people on through 1 Corinthians 14 and explain why we don't do that. We are an immersionist committed body, baptism by immersion after salvation. That is the number one reason people don't join our church. And so it is a big stumbling block to people, especially for those who've just gotten exposed to an expository ministry who might be 40 years old, 50 years old, 60 years old, and you tell them, sorry, you have to be baptized by immersion. They'll say, well, I was baptized. Oh, when was that? Well, when I was 3 months old. And I'll be the one to say, well, you were never baptized. You were sprinkled. And that becomes a difficult issue. The role of women in the church is a very controversial issue. So what we try to do is front load all these controversial issues, deal with them, guarding that front door. But back then, I would say within the first year, I had two men that pretty much wanted to abduct the ministry, and they're all older than me. I'm all of 28, so what do I know, right? And the first guy was a Bible college graduate. He had pastored and was wanting to worm his way in, and I was naive enough to let him until he started a class, teaching a class, and over time, he just pretty much killed it. And I realized his gift wasn't teaching, um, and it was more administrative, and when I suggested that to him, he got mad, left the church, took two couples, and started a church about 3 miles away, and we were all of 6 months old.
Wow.
So that was that was eye-opening, and that has repeated itself. I remember hearing a church leader say, in fact, I think it was John MacArthur who said that a lot of men will pastor 5 churches during their lifetime. He said, "I've pastored 5 churches by remaining in this one for all these years, and I have seen that churn rate." And a lot of it is people move, jobs change,
Sure.
station in life changes. A lot of times when something unfortunate happens to people, whether it's a divorce or something with their children, they just can go to another church rather than remain and be embarrassed. And a lot of that happens, and I've chosen never to chase them and pursue them. But I would say that those conflicts began, and then over the years, the repeated issue is once the church grows to where you have staff members, is staffing. That's the number one issue. And I typically quote Hudson Taylor, who said his greatest joy was the staff of the China Inland Mission, and his greatest burden was the staff at the China Inland Mission.
Wisdom there.
Right. So we're always looking for staff. We're always dealing with staff. And I preside over about 100 staff members with the 3 ministries that God has given us. So that there's a churn rate there. I want everybody to be happy, and everybody isn't. And so there's a lot of, coming and going and challenges, but that's part of the role God's placed me in. So I accept it.
I love how you mentioned there, guarding the front door. And that was actually one thing that really surprised me at a church the size of what Shepherds has grown to now, the fact that you do the membership class. And I just always thought that was so unique. Most big churches, that's not something that's deemed as very important. But I'm hearing you say the exact opposite. And I think that that's biblical, is that this is a very important assembly of believers, and we need to protect who's coming in to guard the unity and all that. I appreciate your perspective on that. Was there ever a time that you almost hung it up, like period, Cary?
We're talking about next week or last week or today? No, well, when you plant a church, you've answered a couple of questions. One is this is God's leading, and you're sure of that, and you're risking everything in a sense. I had twin babies who were 5 months old, and a wife, and who was really helpful because she was right there. Let's go do this. I don't know if you've heard that story, but you've answered that question. But then when it comes to the kind of church you're going to pastor, you're responding to what God brings you. I had close relationships with a young man who was a stock car racer. I don't know anything about cars. I can't change an oil filter. But I entered that world. There was a lady, a charter member. Her floor was a dirt floor. And when I'd go visit her, she'd do two things. She'd spit out her chewing tobacco, and she'd put in her teeth.
Wow.
And she'd say, "Come on." I think she called me preacher. Okay, so there is some deep South,
Oh, yeah.
here. So that's what God's doing. And then I'd answered the question. I didn't come here for money, and I didn't come here for the size of the church. So over the years, when I was tempted because of problems, well, maybe there's another church. And you know what? About the time I'd feel that way, a church would knock on my door. Churches that I've highly respected, sort of the dream job. And I knew there would only be two reasons why I'd leave it. I want to get away from conflict. I would be sort of part of it. But then they might pay me more and the church was larger. Well, I didn't come for that. So I was going to leave because of that. But there are reasons, and we can talk about some of those if you want, as to why, I was tempted to think, well, Lord, where is that other place?
Oh, yeah. Well, I think that would be really helpful for people because I think you'd have to be deceiving yourself, I think, as a pastor or any worker in any kind of ministry, if you think that there's never going to be seasons where you're doubting where you're at.
Right.
So, yeah, I'd love to hear kind of how you thought through some of those things.
Sure. Well, I remember at one point in time, there was some conflict related to a former elder who ended up responding to the conflict by accusing me of a number of things, one of which was breaking the law. Now, this is going back, 30 years. So I think safely no one would know about this. But at any rate, I was accused of that. And he was a part-time staff pastor who had a counseling ministry. And we would have conversations, and I would ask him if he's counseling a couple who end up divorcing, is there an individual in that marriage who needs discipline? Do we need to follow up in any way, shape, or form? And so he would respond, yes or no. Well, fast forward the tape over a few years, and when we replaced him with a full-time pastor who would counsel, he got very upset with that and accused me of violating confidentiality and asking him questions about people he counseled. So I didn't know. Maybe I did. Innocently. I just viewed him as a pastor. He's on our staff, on our payroll.
Sure.
So we got legal counsel, and I think it was the Rutherford Institute who said that no, pastors on a staff can share any information of anyone in a confidential manner, like doctors can in a practice. So I was relieved I had broken the law. But when that all began, I had some young men on the elder team who assumed it was true. Rather than assume, well, don't receive a charge against an elder without some witnesses. Well, they just accepted it. And I think I went through probably 6-8 months of review or suspicion. And then, of course, with those charges came the well-worn charge that I was a dictator. I have heard that over the years and have come to understand that when I make decisions that people like, I'm a good leader. When I make decisions they don't like, I'm a dictator.
Amazing how that works.
It is. And I've learned to expect it. And frankly, the way our polity is set up, I only have one vote out of 24. And my vote isn't equal to those 24. There might be times I'd like it to be, but it isn't. And we don't make any decision without a unanimous vote among our elder team. And that's protected us over the years, but that's always been my desire to develop consensus. So, but yeah, that hurt. And hurt deeply. And I remember preaching at another church that we had planted right when all of that had hit, when my integrity was in question. And I drove by the church on the way to preach at that church we'd started. And I remembered looking over at it thinking, well, Lord, is my time coming to a close? Because without integrity, I have nothing. Right? Those qualifications in 1 Timothy 3 and Titus 1, that's all about integrity. And I thought, maybe this is it. I wasn't going to leave because of problem people. I'm ready to fight, for pure doctrine. But it was that personal attack that hurt deeply. Well, just to tie the stitch together, I happened to be preaching through Nehemiah at the time. And I was somewhere around chapter 4 and 5 where Sanballat and Tobiah are lobbing hand grenades, at Nehemiah. And they're trying all sorts of things to get him derailed. And they try to get him to sin, go into the temple, your life's in danger. He just says, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to sin. But they did that open letter. They wrote that open letter. The only reason you're doing this is because you want to be the big shot. You want to be the governor. And we're going to tell the king that you want to be king. And Gashmir, whoever that guy is, he says it's true. So I don't know. Do you know who Gashmir was? I mean,
It's the big mystery.
that's the big mystery. So yeah, he says it's true. So it's got to be true. And it's interesting that at that time, Nehemiah prays, "O Lord, O God, strengthen my hands." The other things he didn't even pray. It's like, no, I'm not going down to Ono to retreat with you. You're going to do me harm. He says no 4 times. They mock him. A fox can knock the wall down, and we're going to come attack you. And he just tells everybody, okay, get a sword on. Didn't bother him at all. But they attacked his integrity. And that's when he says, "Oh God, strengthen my hands." And well, I was preaching through that. And I went back years later after realizing this to listen. I never listened to me. It's really discouraging, right? And I'm certainly not going to watch this. That's even real. That's just depressing. But I went back and found by the date what that sermon was, because I wanted to see if it was coming out. Was I angry? Was I depressed, discouraged? And I listened to it, and thank the Lord, there was humor. I just went right through the text, and I never mentioned this. And that's a rule of thumb, by the way. I never bring those problems into the pulpit, and that's something I would tell pastors never do. Don't bring those conflicts into the pulpit. Don't get up in the pulpit and say, we have a problem in this church with gossip. Well, probably 5 people are gossiping. The other 95 people didn't know we had a problem. And he just told everybody. We didn't bring it. And I was encouraged by that, and also discovered in that a key protection for pastors, and that is to be expositors. You hide in that text. You hide behind it. It's your joy. It's your source of strength. So I'm rambling on. We'll go back on track, but that hurt the most. And I would say it's those personal attacks that still have that little zinger to it.
Oh, yeah.
Somebody can call me a heretic. Wouldn't bother me. Somebody can threaten me. I've had bomb threats. We've done. I don't lose any sleep. But to be accused of being dishonest or proud, that really hurts, and it sends me into some soul searching as well, which is probably good.
Wow. Yeah, that's really neat to hear from your perspective. I mean, these are the things that, well, by your own admission, they don't come out in the pulpit. So it's really cool to hear this kind of thing.
Right.
And I'm sure there's a lot of people who are encouraged saying, oh, thank the Lord, I'm not the only one who thinks about those things. I love the way you mentioned, just how having a realistic and biblically oriented goal of like why you're here. You're not here for a bigger church. You're not here for a bigger paycheck. Really kept you in the ministry at this church at that time. I wonder, has the perspective changed at all as the years have gone by? So looking back now, almost 40 years into ministry versus say like 5 years into the ministry, or 3 or 1. Does that perspective change at all? I mean, the church has grown a lot bigger, so you'd be harder pressed to find a bigger church in one sense. So what keeps you in ministry now versus back then?
Well, that's a good question. I should have studied more. Yeah. Well, I think in the early days, it's almost this pioneering. Let's go. We got to do this. Lord, I want to do this for you. We want the church to take root. There is that element of every week is an adventure. What's going to happen? Who's going to show up? The first Sunday, who's going to show up? Who's coming back?
Yeah.
And we'd raise $650 a month support, which barely covered rent. Even back then, our rent was $500. That should have opened my eyes to how expensive this area was. But it's more of a, I'm going to do this for you, Lord. Now, it's more of a, Lord, if you'll allow me to do this, I would love to keep doing it. It's more of a, it's entirely in his hands as to how long, and not so much anymore with, hey, I got to go do this. We're going to go do this. Lord, what do you want to bring us to do? And I'm just just privileged to be able to do it. I think in the early days it was more, "Hey, Lord, show me your will, I'm going to do it." Now it's, um, if you be pleased with whatever your will is to just be involved in some way, I'd be thrilled. And so it's just one day at a time as he gives me health and lucidity to some degree to keep going.
I think that's a neat contrast, not a bad one. I think that kind of contrast is natural in understanding. I mean, as you, not that your life is near the end, but as you fade toward the end of ministry,
Pete,
I just really want to be clear on that. As it's a different perspective, there's a different understanding that, I just want to be useful as long as God will let me be useful. And I appreciate how you said that. Going back to some of the early or later years, I suppose, I'm going to ask a deeply personal question here. Was there ever a time that you can look back on and say, wow, I was really wrong on this, and I wish I would have handled that differently? Sometimes people can be in ministry for 30, 40 years and say, yeah, I've never made a mistake,
Well, well, that would be a mistake to say that. So they just made one. I think probably what I would like to redo is a couple of things. I'd like to redo a more systematic discipleship for new believers. I've discipled a lot of people, a lot of men over the years, never developed, okay, here's a 12-week plan. I always found those difficult, sometimes maybe a little bit too shallow, I don't know, but I never developed one. I think I would want to start out that way a little better. I would definitely handle staffing better, take my time in hiring, made mistakes in putting men into the office of elder or deacon too quickly, learned the hard way that you don't present a man to the body to be a deacon because you really would like to see him serve. You put the guy in who's serving. Or an elder. I really think he'd be a good leader. He just like the way he thinks and responds. I just believe he'd be a good leader. So we present him as a nominee, and he never leads. And so I would be slower on those. We are very slow now. We have an internship of 2 years for our elders, and move slowly. When a pastor joins our staff, they're automatically considered an elder. I've never been able to divide those two scripturally, but there's a practical side of it. The lay elders, the non-vocational, we don't pay them; they're volunteering. And the pastoral elder is, we typically call them pastors. That's how people just typically think of them, but they're elders. But we now have them go through a 2-year process before they'll vote. And because we want to outnumber pastoral elders by lay elders, just for conflict of interest issues and best practices, some of our pastors don't vote for quite some time because they outnumber the lay elders. So I would go slower on presenting people for leadership. I think I'd have tried to do a much better job in systematizing a discipleship program. I look at younger church planters now, and they just seem to have so much together. They can spit out their core values. I never heard that expression, when I planted a church. You just rented a school, and here's the Bible. That's it. I never did really get into mission statements because it was hard for me to improve on Matthew 28. That's pretty much it. But there are guys that just develop those, and then they lead the congregation with better clarity. And I think I would like to have done a better job at that as well.
I appreciate you mentioning that. To piggyback on that, since you brought it up and everyone wants to know, what are you looking for in your fellow leaders? What makes a good fellow leader? Who are the people you're trying to identify?
When it comes to staffing, or let's say professors, I'll talk about your job, Pete. We'll turn the corner.
Is it in jeopardy here? Is it?
It wasn't until this podcast.
Yeah, exactly.
No, number one on this list for a staff, for pastor, for elder, for potential leader is humility. Now, I feel a little proud in saying that because that may come across like, well, I've got it. I'm humble. No, that's just something that's observable. It's identifiable the way
And
people
very
respond.
biblical.
Absolutely. We typically start with competency and I'm sorry, we start with character. And humility would be part of that. We start with 1 Timothy 3.
Hmm.
We start with Titus 1. And we don't deal with competency. That's way down the list. That's where I've made mistakes. And bringing people on who had really wonderful character, but didn't have the competency for the role we needed. And then there's a third thing that we rarely talk about because it seems very worldly to even say it, but it's culture.
Hmm.
Do they fit? Every church is a personality, and it's developed by the Lord. It's no doubt evidenced or demonstrated by leadership. Some guys wouldn't do what I do in the pulpit. I laugh. I don't mind telling a funny story, and at least I think it's funny. But some guys wouldn't do that. I use illustrations, so there's a personality there that would be different.
Mhm.
We aren't stayed. Our music is blended. So when we bring somebody from the outside, I really want them to see it and feel it because there's a personality that's unique. And you came from Minnesota. Now, I was born in Minnesota, so I knew you were a great guy right away. Knew you were humble and very confident. Yeah. Oh my goodness. Yeah. Minnesota, man. But West Coast, East Coast, there's a difference.
Yeah.
Northeast, Northwest. There are different ways of viewing things. I have often said if I pastored 20 minutes south of here, I would fail miserably because I don't want to sit on somebody's porch for 20 minutes and talk about, wheat or
Hmm.
corn. I'd really rather deal with people who live by this clock, and they appreciate an email. A phone call is amazing to people today. A handwritten note is gold today. Kenny went away, and that was cool to do an email. We're going back to handwritten notes.
Mhm.
Get a handwritten note, and I love that kind of culture.
Hmm.
And we never think about that, but I've made mistakes in thinking who would be a good leader, professor, pastor, and not think of culture, not think of competency, but only look at character, and all three need to be in play.
Hmm. That's helpful. Going back to the idea of conflict that arises since
I
that
just want to dig into that.
I feel like I'm, in the chair here, assessing things.
There are other people who can watch this, okay?
Yeah, that's true.
We
That's
won't mention
true.
any names.
That's
Go ahead.
true.
Go ahead.
Well, I just think it's helpful in thinking through, how you've had this ministry experience. One of the things that can either make or break a church, a seminary, lots of things is knowing when to kind of when to engage and when to say, I don't necessarily think that's best, but I'm going to let my people do it that way as a leader. And so how do you gauge that where you kind of, Lord willing, you're getting the right kind of people around, but then there is some conflict, but
Right.
is it worth engaging or should you just let it play out? Like, how do you think through those kinds of issues?
Well, think about your own family and think about things that your children would do where you'd really need to say, okay, we're going to sit down when I get home.
Mhm.
We're going to go through the conversation. You're going to be disciplined. This is a big one.
Mhm.
Kinsley's probably telling you when the big one is, right?
Yep.
This is a big one. And just a lot of other stuff is just normal conflict. It's just personalities that don't mesh, gel. I remember starting at a church with one of our church plants that we started with a pastor who dealt with every problem as if it were of equal significance.
Hmm.
If there were two women or two couples, they just didn't agree, they didn't really like each other as much, or they just weren't getting along as well, he'd take them into the room and it would be the sit down. And it became actually very embarrassing
Hmm.
and awkward. Some things need to just be let go. Some things are just family issues that are going to have your normal ebbs and flows. Ask your family, where are we going to go eat lunch today? And you're going to get 4 different opinions. So, and by the way, that reminds me, let's just talk globally for a moment. I had a professor in the seminary make the comment, I'm not sure if it's accurate, it might be low, but he said 14% of your congregation doesn't like you.
Hmm.
Doesn't like you. So if it was somebody else taking your place, they'd be fine. They just don't like you. So can you live with that? That's one of the things as a pastor I had to come to understand. There are people that they're there, but their family's there. Maybe we're down the street. Maybe we have a good children's program they like. But in terms of adults, we don't cotton, as we'd say in the South. We just don't get together. That's why every time we have a church vote, you have to sign it. I know who's going to vote no.
Hmm.
And they're just never going to vote yes, because whatever I present is something they're just not going to like.
Hmm.
So can a pastor get up, preach to 100 people, and know that 14 people really don't like him all that much?
Hmm.
He needs to learn that and get over that.
How did you get over that?
Well, I try to kick him out as quick as I can.
Yeah.
We're not going to play that. Gays are going to take that out. Maybe no, we can leave it. No, when you identify him, don't take it personally.
Hmm.
You just don't fit well with them. You teach a large ABF.
Hmm.
There are some of those couples or some of those singles that you just naturally gravitate toward. And your personalities fit well. Others, you might think, I wonder if they like me, or when you're teaching, they're just sort of looking around and you're not really connecting. And I can tell you right now, I got 3 people that are going to sleep. I know where they sit, so I try to avoid it.
I'm sorry. Okay. It's just
I know where you sit, Peter.
yeah.
No, you're in the back with
Yeah.
Inslee and your kids. No, I know that, and I think pastors who have to make everything right.
Mm-hmm.
I think of Paul. Here's Paul. He's saying to Syntyche and Euodia, "Hey, get along." He puts that in a letter, which is pretty significant. So there is probably a lot of conflict brewing, and he does address it, but he doesn't say what it is. We don't know what the problem was.
Hmm.
We just knew it was big enough for him to say, "Hey, guys, get along." Rather than, let me give you 5 verses, and this is what Syntyche's doing wrong, Euodia is doing wrong. He just touched on it. And it's like John saying, when I arrive, I'm going to deal with Diotrephes. He could have said a lot. He did give us a little bit, but not much. He's writing to Corinth. And again, we get enough to know this church was a big problem.
Hmm.
They didn't like Paul. They accused him on personal grounds. And yet he writes this kind letter that's also including elements of correction and rebuke. So that's that balance. I think for a pastor especially, who has to make everybody like each other and everybody like him and everybody get along perfectly, well, first of all, he's going to pastor a church of about 50, 60, 70 people. Once it gets to 150 and beyond, you've lost the ability to know everybody personally by name. And you'll go through that transition. It's an awkward time. And you'll find people coming now that they would just soon have somebody else as their pastor.
That's very wise. I think there's definitely a lot of benefit to thinking through those things. Now, one of your favorite things to do, perhaps I'm missing the boat on this, but I don't think so, is to preach.
Yes.
I think you like that.
I do.
How has your preaching changed over the years? If we go back and listen to the first sermon, what are we going to be thinking?
Well, back then, I thought it was a sin to pause. Okay? There's no pausing. I was rapid. I have everything transcribed because of radio and internet. So I know how many words are in a transcript. Back then, I would preach for, I don't know, I tried not to go 35, 40 minutes maybe. But those manuscripts would be 6,000 words, okay? And I am now at 4,000 words at 35.
You don't have as much to say?
I don't. I haven't learned nearly as much from the text as I used to think I knew. So, I've slowed down quite a bit just physically, but I also like the pregnant pause.
Hmm.
I want to give people time to think.
Right.
I'm not so rapid fire. So the style has changed. And I remember being told in seminary, and I tell my seminary students the same thing now, that it takes 5 years to get comfortable with your environment,
Hmm.
wherever you preach. It'll just take 5 years to figure it out. At my 6th year, I went to manuscript. So my first 5 years, it was extemporaneous with an outline taped in my Bible. And it's pretty bad. It's pretty bad stuff. When we started the radio, we can't really use that stuff.
Hmm.
You can't find a sentence that actually is complete.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
So they have this program that starts with a 20-second clip with the musical intro. So they fill it with a clip from the sermon. And my son, who's the executive producer, cannot find a 20-second cogent clip. Seth. So he has to take a sentence from here, tag it onto that sentence to come up with something that makes sense.
Yeah.
And then they put it on the radio and they call it vintage wisdom, which is another nice way of saying this is old stuff and we're going to put it in the summer months because it's really, really bad. Now, my wife would say, Stephen, if she were sitting here, I'm glad she's not, but if she were, she would say, it's the Word of God. And you were teaching the Word of God back then.
Hmm.
And that hasn't changed. One thing that I did do at the beginning that I still do is decided to preach through books of the Bible. Now, Sunday morning, Sunday night would be more topically oriented, maybe characters from the Bible or whatever. But I remember finishing a book of the Bible. I think it was the Gospel of Mark, which I think I did in, 13 weeks. So that tells you something too.
Hmm.
But I remember walking around thinking, I wonder what book would be interesting. And I had about as close to a charismatic experience as I've ever had. I didn't hear a voice, but boy, it was in my heart, and it was, what do you know about my word to say what's interesting?
Hmm.
And so that Sunday, I started at Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, and told the congregation I would preach through the whole Bible. But I still have that manuscript, and it's now almost humorous because we just finished Luke. It took me 4 years, and now we're in 2 Peter. Now it'll probably take 2 or 3.
So you're not on pace is what you're saying.
I'm not on pace. I and I will say I didn't treat your beloved Old Testament. I think I did Leviticus. I don't know, probably a dozen or less.
It's more than most churches.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you for that. And Deuteronomy a little bit longer. Slowed down in Joshua. Loved Judges. Never knew what was in that book. That was amazing. And then Esther and Ruth are to this day my favorite books of the Bible. Nehemiah, love that. And then after Job, sort of, Ecclesiastes, then I sort of stopped, went to the New Testament. And I've only preached through, I think, 5 books of the New Testament.
Hmm.
So at this point in my life, now I'm thinking, what book will I never preach? Lord, direct me. It's not which book is interesting.
Right.
The Spirit really clobbered me that day and changed my attitude. It's all profitable, and it's a delight to preach it one book at a time.
Oh, that's really a fantastic example of how to think through that. One thing I just have to pick your brain on, because we've talked about this before many moons ago, but for the sake of the recording, walk us through your view on PowerPoint.
You mean how I've gone down that slippery slope?
Yeah, I mean the fact that you're completely liberal now.
I'm so seeker-oriented.
Yeah, exactly.
Everything's designed for that seeker,
Yeah.
whoever Harry or Susie or whatever. Well, I tell you what, I was just absolutely against it because those people are going to sit there and they're going to listen to me and they're not going to look at anything else.
Mm-hmm.
Our communications director was on staff at Gene Getz Church, who's coming to 360 this year, and now in his 80s. Very creative man. But at any rate, she asked me one time, she says, why don't you put your points up on the screen? I said, no. I said, if they didn't get it, they weren't listening. And so I'm just gonna, just give the point, and I don't want this thing to become a show. I don't want it to become the focus. And she said, well, I like taking notes. And a lot of times you don't repeat it, and I've missed it. And I remembered thinking, okay, she's parroting something my wife has often said, but I could always tell her during lunch what it was. I've heard this often. And I thought, well, why penalize people? I do want them to get the point. So I said to her, you know what? Let me give it some thought. And so I came back a little later on. I said, let's do it. Feeling like a real liberal. Okay. So let's do it. And then she said, well, why not put the scripture up? And I said, oh, no, absolutely not. They're bringing their Bible. They're going to open it. I want to hear the rustling of the pages, or we're dead. We're a dead church. And she said, well, have you ever thought about the fact that half the audience probably didn't bring a Bible, and you're actually showing them the scripture? And I said, well, I hadn't thought about that. And I said, let me think about it. So I thought about it a little while, and then decided to do it, and realized something she didn't say, and I've never heard it before, but it has become the number one reason I like it. And I would encourage guys to do it. Here's the reason. I get everybody in that translation. So I'm not going to spend time going, now your translation might read this, or that. I may do that rarely, but I don't have to. It's the ESV. It's on the screen. So I've got the New King James, I got the NASB, the NIV, the NLT, the Legacy Now, well, whatever it is. And they're all reading the same translation, which is very helpful. I get them right there. And now what I've started doing is, and I don't know if you've noticed, but I started bolding a word that I want to emphasize in my point. I'll maybe even underline it and bold it so they see it right away. So that's, again, it saves me time. I don't have to say, let me just emphasize this word here. We're reading it. Savior, that's the key word there, that noun. So I have found it immensely helpful. It does bother me that when I say, open your Bibles to 2 Peter chapter 1, I don't hear that wonderful rustling through. I see people pulling out their phones, and pulling it up. And and I don't know what translation they're using, but at least I'm getting them all in the word and they're reading it. So there's the slippery slope. And of course, the music guy has loved it because he does lyrics, which gets everybody looking up as they sing rather than down in a hymnal. Now, I'm a musician, so I'm the advocate but they need to see the notes, and they need to know how to harmonize. And so we're not teaching the generation, coming along how to harmonize. But the truth is, we aren't teaching them to harmonize that way anyway. They're going to learn harmonize by learning an instrument. So we started the academy, the music academy, so that we can teach and train a generation of musicians. But so he loves it. Everybody's up watching. So I'm just a total seeker-oriented liberal,
Well, I was just saying, a lot of people probably have problems because Jesus didn't use PowerPoint. But I mean, what are you gonna do? You can't please everybody. That's
That's a very good point to make. Yeah. But he did say, look at the birds, and look at the flowers. So he was using visual aid.
true.
I'm sure.
Very true. Yeah.
To some degree.
I think they're right. No, this has been really good. So we have a conference coming up. Yes, a Shepherds 360 conference, and it is largely geared around this idea of pastoral ministry. Well, not just pastoral ministry, but ministry in general, perseverance.
Yeah.
And do you want to just tell us a little bit about that? Like, what brought that about, and kind of, why are you excited about that?
Yeah. Well, I think that's one of the reasons we spent so much time talking today is what does it take to trip somebody up, to discourage them, and frankly, church leaders, we're all singing from the same sheet of music. We have
Or PowerPoint.
or or PowerPoint. We're dealing with struggles, and this will be the last year we actually have a theme.
Hmm.
And from moving on forward, it's just simply going to be Shepherds 360. We'll have a theology track, homiletics track, ethics, and all that. And we'll have key speakers in those general sessions. But we wanted to at least address this one because we all feel it.
Hmm.
And I wanted to get a bunch of old guys here. And I've joked that that's the prerequisite. You got to be an old guy. And I wanted to get Chuck Swindoll because he just retired and our attendees are going to enjoy the interview where I interview him because he can't travel. He's blind now, about 99%, and that's why he did step down, by the way, from the pulpit, is because he couldn't see his notes and read his Bible anymore. Still very lucid, very funny, engaging. Just a tremendous example to me of persevering with joy. His byword is still grace. It's still grace. It's still joy. But to hear his stories of conflict when he's in his 80s, he plants a church, and here he is at 81, and he'll tell the story. At 81 years of age, he has this uprising among some elders who basically tell him, we'll run a church, you stay home, and you show up on Sunday morning. And we don't want you leading anything. And he was going to quit. And he said that to his wife. They were lying in bed, and he just says out loud, I'm going to quit. I'm telling you more now than he'll tell in the interview. But she sat up in bed, and she said, what did you say? And he said, I've had enough. I'm 81. I'm going to quit. And she said, no, you aren't. You're not going to quit. You're not going to end your ministry this way. You've faced too many battles already. You're not going to let these guys put you out to pasture. You need to do the right thing. And he was encouraged by that. And but I wanted to emphasize it because he's 81 and he's planted this church of thousands of people. And you'd think he doesn't have problems. Well, no matter the size of the church, I'm facing the same issues I did when we had 50 in the band room. In fact, probably more of it, whether it's sin, issues of discipline, just this past week, 2 issues of sexual abuse. I mean, that is one thing that does increase. It's the same problem. It's just more of it.
Right.
And so I'm really excited that some of these veterans will be able to talk about ministry. Joel Beakey, Robert Smith. I mentioned Gene Getz. He's going to be here. Joe Stowell. I'm not sure how many guys are aware of Joe's ministry. Tremendous ministry as the president of Moody Bible Institute for many years. And, of course, then the interview with Swindoll and a few others. So it'll be a great time. I'm hoping it'll just be a wonderful time of encouragement for the men and women who come, who are serving the church in all kinds of different positions.
Yeah, it's definitely a highlight for both my own life, but then everybody that I get to interact with and talk with, they talk very highly of the conference. I'm really excited for this year's.
That's wonderful. What you're teaching a couple of workshops?
Yeah, so my workshop's going to be on baptism, and
Wonderful.
so that's what Les wanted me to do. And
So you're going to give away your book? You going to give away your book?
I may have some there to give away.
Okay, that'd be great. Fantastic. That's an excellent book. I hope a lot of guys get a hold of it because you cover the issue so well. So that'd be great. So are you doing another workshop on something else, or is that it?
Right now, I think that's all I'm doing. But we'll see what Les has in store. It's like the Lord works through Les and tells me what to do. So
That's great.
I appreciate that. Well, Stephen, I can't call you Dr. Davey because of your information that you shared with us. I appreciate that. But thanks so much for joining us. I'm sure this is going to be really helpful for people.
Thanks, Pete.